are for the council. That's for the council to get information from staff on information that's coming up. There is no public comment period. And in general, you can, if you raise your hand and like you're desperate to say something, I can promise you right now I will not call on you. So that's just how it's going to work. That's mean. That being said, here we get started with the Creekside Quarter update, Mr. Mitten.
Mayor and Council, Eric Mitten, your city attorney, here to provide an update on the Creekside Quarter. Okay, all right. So just to orient ourselves, this is a very, very preliminary design that was shown before. It's useful for discussion purposes just to orient. We see I-5 in the middle. We see what is currently Hawthorne Park on the east side. On the west side, a chunk of downtown east of Riverside. So the purpose of the study session tonight, I want to get this map on the table. Then there's going to be two parts. One is an informational update, particularly for the public. It's been a while since we discussed this in a public meeting. And so provide an informational update as to where things currently stand. And then very important to get direction from council in terms of directions going forward. So I'm going to be discussing the Creekside Quarter in terms of various different components. Just to orient, I'm going to be talking a lot about the west side. That's all the private development west of the I-5 corridor, or to the left and down of I-5 for those who don't love compasses. And then we'll be talking about the baseball stadium component, and then also the southeast quadrant of this, or the far right end, next. So the west side component, and this is, to be totally clear, private development. There would be a hotel, a conference center, other private development, some commercial, exact details to be determined. Everything on the west side is still under negotiation, and I've been talking with the attorney who represents the developer who's been working on it. There's a lot of positivity coming out of those discussions, but nothing locked down, ready to share. These discussions are ongoing, and so there is still an intent to build out hotel, conference center, etc., but those discussions at this current time are ongoing, so I don't have a lot of specifics to share on that front. Moving on to the baseball stadium component. We've discussed a lot of different ways in which this could be structured. Right now, the developer who's looking at developing the west side is not looking at privately developing the baseball stadium as part of the private development they're doing. There's still a very strong interrelation between the two, but if the will of the council is to move forward with this, we would be looking at this as a public development in the north half of Hawthorne Park. This is a project that would have to move quickly. Major League Baseball has got some very aggressive timelines in order to be able to find a place to move. And so in order to facilitate, if council wants to move forward with this, staff has worked to draw up what a roadmap forward could look like if that is ultimately the will of council to keep moving forward with this. We're looking at a minor league stadium, consistent obviously with the league's requirements, also discussing with the team owner to make sure that the exact specs of what we would be looking at building would be in line with the team's expectations, but also in line with the resources we have available to make sure that we're being wise stewards of public money. The exact details of the stadium in terms of number of seats, features, etc., is still under negotiation with the team and the league. If we were to move forward with this, in order to meet some of the aggressive timelines that we have from Major League Baseball, one thing that we have discussed a lot is a form of alternative procurement. Procurement referring to the way of obtaining contractors to design and build the stadium. So there's a particular method called progressive design build that has become very common in terms of minor league baseball. This would require council approval. It's not something that we can just unilaterally do when we put this out. Just like the construction manager or general contractor alternative procurement method we use for Rogue X. It would require bringing it back to council to discuss, do we want to use this alternative procurement method, and then get approval to do so. So in a normal way, the default way under Oregon law, there's what's known as design bid build. And you first work with an architect, they come up with a design, then you put out a contract for general contractors to construct it, they put in and the lowest price wins, and they then build the design that the architect designed. For a project of this size, it's difficult to do it in that separated two-step process where there's not a lot of dialogue between the architect and the contractor. It can lead to a lot of changes down the line. And so you'll oftentimes see alternative procurement methods such as CMGC or design build for large projects like this. With design build, as I said, one of the upsides is it allows for a flexible, creative approach because the architect and the contractor are working together as a team to design it and then move forward together. The city's got a single contract with that team. But there are also some challenges with design builds. So it's great in terms of timing, and in some cases it leads to a less expensive total project because you don't have the design changed halfway through and the contractor says, that's a great design, but I can't actually build this. The downside is that when you sign up for design build, the first step is coming up with a final design with a guaranteed maximum price. We can certainly put in the request for proposal a target price so that people know what we're looking to spend, but then they work and there's some real time and money put into coming up with a number that is a guaranteed maximum price. And at that time, we have a fish or cut bait moment. We can walk away without violating the contract or being in trouble if we decide that's too rich for our blood. But we do owe them for all the work done to get to that point. So there is a sunk cost involved whether or not we ultimately move forward with the project. That is one downside of the design build process, so I want to be very transparent about that. Going forward, I think next question a lot of folks have is, how are we looking at funding this? First, to be clear, when people talk about a $500 million project, most of that number is private development. That's not $500 million of taxpayer money. There are certain points where we would be involved. The conference center on the west side, already through the sideboards that this council has passed, council expressed an intent that the transient lodging tax increase that the voters ultimately approved last week would be earmarked for the conference center as opposed to a baseball stadium. I don't know yet, as negotiations develop, whether or not there would be an additional ask for additional funds on the west side above and beyond the TLT, but certainly the TLT is earmarked for a conference center. In terms of the baseball stadium, one of the primary components we'd be looking at in order to build that would be tax increment financing from the upcoming version 2.0 of MURA, the Urban Renewal District. That's something that has not been officially stood up, but obviously for those watching, we've been working on standing that up for months. We're moving towards establishing a new urban renewal district. Now, just to educate folks who may be watching from home who are not used to TIF versus TLT and all these acronyms I'm throwing around like it's just fun to use acronyms. What tax increment financing is when an urban renewal district is established, properties within the district, their property tax, a snapshot in time is taken. Where does their property taxes at? Then as the district goes on and the property values increase, the property taxes increase, that relative increase is then diverted from its normal sources, general funds of various public entities, into a special pot that is the Urban Renewal Fund, and that's what we talk about when we're spending TIF. So it's not a new or additional tax that taxpayers feel, but it is deviating taxpayer dollars from their normal recipients, our general fund, the county's general fund, et cetera, into a pot that can be used for urban renewal purposes. So one of the things when you're standing up an urban renewal district is you set a maximum indebtedness. We're going to collect this much money, and that's what we're going to collect from this district. And more is better, right? Well, of course, the more you divert, that also means that the more you take away from general fund dollars. So there's always a policy decision in setting that, where you set that maximum amount. The Citizens Advisory Committee that this council established for the new urban renewal district had recommended a maximum indebtedness from year 2.0 of 90 million. And if we were to deviate, and these are very rough numbers still under negotiation, 45 or 50 million or something in that ballpark from TIF to support the Creekside Quarter, with 90 million, that would be half or more of the entire TIF collected from Urban Renewal 2.0. So we've also been looking at, would it possibly make sense to do a maximum indebtedness from Mira 2.0 of 50% more, 135 million, so that if we use approximately $45-50 million of TIF to support the Creekside Quarter, we're talking about a third of Mira 2.0's resources and not a half. So these are all decisions that we'll have to wrestle with as we go forward, but I wanted to at least put them on the table because nothing is free, and baseball stadiums are no exception. Now, obviously, there would also be a contribution from the team. The exact amount and what that looks like is still under negotiation, active negotiation. I do want to be transparent that the majority of the cost of the stadium would end up coming from the city and not the team. This is not a situation where we can get the team to carry the full freight to build the stadium. If that's our position, the stadium will not happen. So, and that is typical with how this is done in other jurisdictions as well. But there would be a contribution from the team, and a significant one, but the exact amount of that is still under negotiation right now. There are other sources we'd be looking at to also supplement this. Car rental tax, naming rights, concession surcharge. I do have to say concession surcharge are also an important thing in terms of maintenance. It's because with any public improvement, you don't just have to build it, but you have to maintain it. And concession surcharges are a common method of maintaining stadiums once they are built. But all of these exact details are to be worked out, but this is what we are looking at in terms of potential funding packages for this development, for this baseball stadium, if council's will is to move forward with this. And then the last point of discussion before I open things up is the south side of Hawthorne Park. Right now, in that conceptual design you saw, it remained city parkland, very similar to its current state. And there's always a possibility then when we're looking at this that it could remain that way or it could change. And this is a very important policy question for council with upsides and downsides to both sides of it. If there is redevelopment in the south side of Hawthorne Park, there can be certain synergies in a relation with other parts of the Creekside Quarter that could lead to an even more vibrant development. The other thing is, under our code, whenever we sell off public property, it's sold off at market value, and that does generate funds, and those funds could be used to fill a gap in a funding package for the stadium. So there are some benefits to offering up the south side of Hawthorne Park for redevelopment as part of this project. On the other hand, there is limited park space in the downtown core. We have 3 or 4 parks, and we have Alba Park, we have Vogel Plaza, we have Pear Blossom Park near the Lithia Building, and we have this. Hawthorne Park is the only green natural park with mature trees and a lot of grass of those 4 in the downtown core. And in a fully developed downtown core, when you give up parkland, you never get it back. There's not another chunk of land where we could create a new Hawthorne Park to offset this if this land is lost as parkland. And particularly given that it is a unique nature compared to the other parks in downtown, that is something worth pointing out. Now, I will say, regardless of the ultimate policy decision that council makes in terms of the south side of Hawthorne Park, there is certainly discussion with the developer that there would be some sort of beautification effort in Bear Creek as it runs through the Creekside Corridor so that it supports the sort of redevelopment and is in line with what folks are trying to build as part of this development. So next steps, just some different things to put on the timeline. Some may ask, do we want to have some sort of public engagement as part of moving forward before we take next steps and sort of concrete stuff? And that can mean a couple different things in a couple different ways. On one hand, we've got various different public processes in terms of, you know, requests for proposal needing authorization to be issued, you know, coming back. There's always public comment through council meetings, regular meetings. We have public comment at the beginning of every session, and people can always email councilors. On the other hand, we can also do structured engagement, structured comment, much like council is currently doing with the Main Street bike lanes, where we have a survey and a public discussion that's going to take place. And so staff was looking for some feedback and direction as to if council wants to engage in something, whether it be through our normal processes or a direct approach, what that would look like, how long we should leave for that window. Of course, public comment can, a thorough, formal type of public comment can take several months to occur. And Major League Baseball is watching us timeline-wise, so that is one factor in that decision-making. And then also, just to highlight, if council's direction is to continue moving forward with the baseball stadium component of the Creekside Corridor, I just want to be transparent about what next steps would look like. When we put out an RFP, there's a choice involved as to whether or not you have a preliminary design as part of it. There's upsides to just having a spec sheet. There's upsides to having a spec sheet and preliminary design. Preliminary designs aren't free, and I'm not qualified to draw one. Anyone who's ever seen me color up a map knows I'm not qualified to draw one. Also, at some point as we move forward, we're going to have to do formal due diligence. Obviously, staff has looked at this, and if we didn't think this was a viable project, we wouldn't be talking about it. But there are formal steps, traffic studies, et cetera, that would need to happen. Again, there is a cost associated with those. And then as we move forward, the biggest cost, of course, would be if we actually issue the RFP and someone says, hey, I think I can build this at the price you're targeting, they may do a significant amount of work based on other jurisdictions, maybe even a couple $1 million of work before we have a guaranteed maximum price and we have the final go or no-go decision as part of that contract. So I've thrown a lot of information at everybody. With that, I am happy to answer any questions, and I'd like to open this up for discussion.
All right, questions on the presentation? All right, conversation starter is there's two main things that they were asking for. Let's talk about moving forward, our next steps here. So from the presentation, here's what I heard is the amount of decisions still remaining on stadium design that has to be coordinated with the team owner and also the funding source and let's say the timing from Major League Baseball. Neither one of those two have been solidified at this point. We do know that if we're going to be talking about TIF dollars, that means it goes into the MURA plan. We have a general idea of when the MURA plan would be approved, which I've always had in the back of my head is September 26. So certainly we have a general idea of when funds will start to materialize. We just need to make some decisions on how to get there, like what kind of stadium it is and how much we're going to fund how much the team's going to fund. So these kind of all work together to me. So for me, I see it as a first step forward is assuming the majority of your money is going to come from Mura. Direct staff to come basically go through all the steps that we have to get to a relatively solid number to basically put in the plan. Make sure that that type of stadium is acceptable with the owner. So we all come to a deal and we can all do this in a time frame that works for all the parties involved. I'm a little hesitant because the fast one is go put something out tomorrow, design, build, and go. Pre-construction services aren't free in that either. So that makes me hesitant to do that, particularly when I know the funds wouldn't even really be part of a plan that still has a whole public process to go through. That kind of tricks me into the other part, which is getting public outreach. Certainly if you go through this with a Mura plan, that process has got built-in public outreach. So that sort of takes care of that. So as I hear the decisions that have to be made, the timeframes we know that we are going to be stuck with for the funding source, I feel like we can kind of use those as the guardrails, ask staff to come back with definitions of the tasks to get us to that point, how much it costs to do each task, where that money comes from, and then I think we'll also start to identify where either it doesn't work for us for cost, or it doesn't work for a team owner for cost or the type of facility, or maybe even the schedule doesn't work. But I think we can get that defined down pretty well, and go through this strategically and logically. Yes, ma'am.
I would still like additional public commentary time frame outside of Mura.
Okay. Yes, sir.
So Eric, I know you don't have a crystal ball, but do we have a prediction for when we think we're going to have something negotiated and signed with our developer here? I mean, I know we've heard some of the status updates and there is positivity there, but there's a difference between positivity and a signature.
I have nothing I can report in terms of whether that will be solidified in weeks or months. I have absolutely no concrete information to share on terms of that timeline, besides, from what I hear, the negotiation between the private parties involved is going well, but nothing I can share in a public meeting.
Okay. So just to tack on the back of that, to me, I think that kind of goes, Mayor, to your point of, I think we're moving in the right direction, and I want to keep moving forward, but I also want to make sure that we're getting concrete, actionable information as we decide to start to spend, millions of dollars on a design build process, or, for me, I think it's hard to say, I could throw up some theoretical numbers where I think I'd say, oh yeah, let's talk about being more involved as an active partner on a stadium or this or that, but without having more concrete information, it's hard for me to say, let's pull the plug and start spending a bunch of money. I mean, I think this is such a huge opportunity for the city, and I think we've got to keep pursuing this. I know that uncertainty is part of this process, so I'm not saying that I'm unhappy with uncertainty. That's the way these developments go. I just want to get things less uncertain as we start to spend more significant dollars. And from a major available funding standpoint, I think you hit it on the head, which is if Mura 2.0 is going to be the primary funding source, there's sort of a timeline limitation there that gives us some breathing room as we try to get to a more concrete place.
Yes, Kevin. Kevin, then Mike.
Yeah, I would say, based on what we heard and what we know, there's a pathway, right? There's a pathway. That doesn't mean it's going to happen. And also, as the big thing is, there's a lot of moving pieces. And I agree with you, Nick. It's to me, it's like, how do you get those pieces together, right? How do you start going from, okay, here's the pathway, but it's really wide, right? How do we start narrowing these things down? How do we get a number with the team? How do we get a design that all parties are comfortable with to get to the point where we are putting something out there and figuring out a number that can actually be built, and then bringing it back to the council? It's like, hey, council, here's the number. Are you willing to put Mura funds or whatever other funds together for a go or no go? And I just want, obviously no decisions made right this second in terms of all these little things in the air. But I just really care as a city that we do what we can in whatever process it is to try to narrow that stuff down. Because there's circumstances beyond our control, right? We have zero control over what Major League Baseball wants, right? They're going to want a certain thing. We have zero control over what the team owner might want, right? And so just getting those things like kind of drilled in, come to a negotiation agreement of like, okay, here's things we're satisfied with, to where we can have, as policymakers, we can have those decisions on, I hope, potentially going forward on that, but also understanding that with all these different pieces up in the air, someone could say something that's it's just not going to work out, right? And I just want us to get to a point where hopefully we have it and we make it happen, or at the very least, we know if it comes to that, it can't happen, right? Just due to things that might be beyond our control or things that we're uncomfortable with as a public body. So however we get to that, I'm happy with. I've talked to the mayor quite a bit about this process, and so he's saying things that make perfect sense to me. And that's something that city staff, I'm assuming, can figure out how to kind of drill down on how we get to that more decision-making part as we have more concrete information.
And Mike, did you have something?
I think a lot, kind of echoing what Stein just said. I don't think we're at a point of, well, pull the plug on this by a long shot. But Eric's point of, we had initial numbers for 90, but we're hoping we can get it down to 60. I want to make sure that, A, we can get it down to 60, but I also want to make sure that the product we'll get for 60 is something we like enough to want to do. Because you strip it down far enough, and maybe we look and we go, this really isn't what we were envisioning, and we don't think what the city wants, so we don't necessarily want to keep going forward with this. But to Eric's point, I don't want to be $1 or $2 or $3 million invested before we find that out. So figuring out how, nothing's free, whether it's staff time or drawings or anything, but figuring out what will it take to find out if we can actually build a product that is within
Okay.
something we can absorb. Does that make sense?
100%. So if we said, we want to know our steps from where we're sitting tonight to opening day, April 2028. Okay. One of the very first ones that I think we're all saying is, prior to chasing a lot of this down, we need to make sure we have some sense that a stadium can come in some proportional scale to what we know or what's in a ballpark of what we can pay for, right? So there's that step. So if we kind of think about that step one, I think, is not going straight to the design build and wait for pre-construction services to solve that problem, to see if there is an intermediate step in there. We can do some kind of design development and estimates. So we're not completely nuts on, we're going to move forward with this idea that we have that we can do this for $60 million. Because if we kind of go forward too fast and not spend some money on that intermediate step, we could get too far down the line and an owner that says, I will not put my team in this stadium, or we just end up not being able to come to terms. I think there's a way we can get much better certainty, which I think is what, if it's me, everyone here, can we actually get a stadium at a price that we believe we can afford? And I don't think we've answered that question yet. And by the way, there could also be counselors here that are saying, I don't think any of those numbers are worthwhile, right? I mean, we're all going to make decisions on what goes into a Mura plan, and you're making a definite choice to fully fund a stadium versus not fund, let's say, downtown housing or other infrastructure improvements. Those are choices that we do need to be able to evaluate. Anyway, but I think there's an easy way, not an easy way, there is a way that we can give some direction to staff to say, hey, I don't think we're comfortable, if I'm understanding everyone, comfortable saying, go forward right now and spend money. we'd like to see something in between, like to know how much it costs to figure out if you can actually do this for 60, or if it's 75, or 32. Yeah,
I like that number.
Yep.
If I can, to your
Yes,
point
sir.
of not moving too quickly, I also, while I recognize the path that has gotten us here as far as different phases of development and different people involved, I don't want to move so quickly that we're creating more work down the line. And on pre-development stuff, or even with the west side development that might be taking place, missing out on opportunities to make these things, I hate this word so much, to create some synergy around doing a big development all at the same time versus two completely isolated developments that are 15 feet away from each other.
sure. If I said back the conversation we've been having about trying to understand what it takes to get better certainty, how much that costs to get that better certainty, what that does for us time frame wise, particularly in the context of knowing where the money's is coming from and how long it takes actually before Mura 2.0 is a reality, to be able to come back with some, again, tasks, costs, and schedules to see how that fits in. Are you following me? Okay.
I'm following you.
Kevin, are you following me?
I am following you, thank you. Just some of the things that I'm concerned about as I saw Eric's presentation is, we're being told that, MLB's got a schedule and we need to, hurry up. And we've been told that since day one on this project, and it's a bit frightening, actually. And I just would like to see a lot more numbers as to how successful this thing would be if it were built. I want to see the evolution of the stadium idea, as far as I kind of had the impression we were spending a lot less of our public money on the stadium than I do now. What happens, or what kind of safeguards do we have against a team just bailing out or folding or whatever it is, and then we're stuck with a stadium? I've been getting feedback from a lot of people that I talk to that there are genuine worries about that side. People are generally much more confident that a convention center or conference center would be a better idea. Do these two ideas need to be, connected at the hip? Can we do one without the other? And it's the first I've heard or even considered the fact that we could actually sell off the southern part of Hawthorne for development. And I'm not sure if we were, how much money we're talking about here, but we could beautify that park into something just as nice as a baseball stadium. I'm not 100% certain that baseball is the way to go, even if we did it. Maybe soccer is a better idea. I mean, there are a lot of questions I have as to whether we should even move forward with this that I would like to see. And then I really don't know what the MLB timeline is, and I'd like to know more about that.
Okay. Other thoughts on, but as far as the next step to get that, to gather that extra information, yes, we're good with that. About trying to answer some of those questions before we commit to anything too further.
Yeah, that's where I'm coming from. Before I spend a ton of money on it, I'd like to know
Okay.
more about its potential success.
Okay. Is there any problem with that direction to staff or something I might be missing? Yes, Mike.
This was towards the end of the presentation, and this is a kind of a gut reaction that I've been chewing on. Those are oxymorons. But you just mentioned the south side. Without diving really into the weeds on it, I'm not super excited by the idea of selling off the south side and development for exactly what you mentioned, which is once you get rid of a park, you're never getting it back. We haven't had formal discussions on this that I can recall. I like the idea of keeping that as green space, and it will probably look different than it does today. But someone had a comment when this first started coming out about just having a concrete jungle, and I would see a lot of value in keeping a good chunk of the park as a park if we can.
Okay. Mr. Card?
I just want to speak to that too, because excuse me, because when I think about Hawthorne Park, I think the northern half of Hawthorne Park used to be a pool. It is not abnormal that we have done stuff like this. I mean, look at what was it, Holmes Park that used to have a facility. on the south end. I mean, so like for us to take space that is right now just a bunch of open grass and turn it into something else, I'm a lot more okay with that. But to your point about the south end of Hawthorne, it's got a bunch of heritage trees. It's green space that is really unique. Like, you can't just bulldoze a building and put a bunch, I mean, you know, you could bulldoze a building and put a bunch of grass in. You can't bulldoze a building and then grow 100-year-old trees overnight. And so the value to me of the south end of Hawthorne Park is it really is a unique kind of park facility for us in Medford, and so like it would have to be something very extraordinary for me to be interested in eliminating the entirety of the south half of Hawthorne Park. I mean, I think there are ways that we could develop to help beautify, and that may mean, you know, shifting some stuff here or there, but at the south end of Hawthorne Park is a really incredible kind of green space that we just do not have a lot of anywhere in the city, frankly. So anyway, those are my thoughts on the south end piece. I would hate to see that turn into a concrete jungle as well.
Okay, let's, oh,
Can I just ask one more thing? Have we approached the county at all to consider whether they'd be interested in joining us on this project, especially the baseball stadium? But
yes, okay, well, when I asked Commissioner Spirituno to write me a check for $100 million and he laughed at me, I mean, that is some outreach. This is true, right? I tried. A little bit. You know, they just have a tendency to be a little bit more, I think their attentions are focused elsewhere right now, particularly with the airport and a detention facility and all that. So I think this is hard to catch their attention, but to say that they would never be a partner, I don't know if that, I wouldn't commit to that. I do know that he will not write me a $100 million check. I was a little aggressive. Maybe I should have tried to lead with some, yes.
I just want to make sure that I'm accurately capturing what I'm hearing.
Okay.
Is the direction that staff comes back with a roadmap and steps? You know, some of the steps have costs involved, or should we take some of those steps that have a modest cost involved to keep things moving and come back when we have something more substantial? Do you want just a roadmap, or do you want us to take some of those initial steps?
Go ahead.
I mean, I guess we maybe need to define what modest cost means, but like my expectation from staff, from me, myself, is that we're going to continue to negotiate with our developer. We're going to continue to negotiate with Major League Baseball. We're going to continue to negotiate with the Emeralds. We're trying to get to agreements there because I think that's important work to answering some of those questions. You know, perhaps there are other things that you're thinking of, Eric, but like the kind of like, in me, I would call it like routine pre-development work that isn't costly outlay, but is just part of that question answering stuff that takes time. I mean, you have to answer, I mean, it takes effort to be able to get some of these answers, right? Is different from saying like, let's go down a process road where we're going to start new investments and spend money on, you know, this design build process or whatever it happens to be. I don't know if that makes sense, and I don't know if others here agree with me in that thinking.
Okay, let me ask you this question about that. How hard or how easy is it to negotiate terms with a team owner when we have not truly defined what the stadium is?
I think one of the big things in terms of negotiating with the team owner is looking at features of the stadium, looking at and really coming up with, when we're talking about what's your contribution, we're looking at a total pie. Doing some sort of due diligence, knowing in terms of traffic utilities, what costs would be involved with the project besides the physical structure itself, would be helpful. So having a green light to spend money on traffic studies, other sorts of routine due diligence, would be helpful in negotiating with the team owner, because both of us are looking at, you know, our portion of a total pie, and knowing exactly what that total pie would be helpful. There may be some costs in terms of a preliminary design for an RFP. We're still discussing with the parties involved whether we want if we move forward with an RFP, whether we want a list of specs or whether we want a preliminary design. If it's determined that a preliminary design is helpful to move that process along, those negotiations along. That's what I was looking at. I was certainly not in any way suggesting spending 7 figures without council knowing that.
Well, and I think, at least for what I have pictured, you take that step, you say, we'd like to cover these 5 things and include a actual concept design of a stadium, right-sized for Medford, and that costs $500,000, and will be done this date. That's some sort of cost and schedule for these tasks. And at which point, we can all sit down and evaluate and say, I don't think that, well, perfect, great, go forth and conquer, or I don't know if we want to spend that money. But it's a different between if you said it was $50,000 and you said it was $5 million for that step, we're gonna evaluate those differently, of course.
Of course.
And that's, I think, at least for myself, I find myself in that area of, I don't know if it's 50 or 5. And we just need to, it would be nice to have that in front of us to get there.
Okay, we can work on a list, try and come up with estimates for that list, and bring them back in city manager and staff reports. Hey, here's a few different steps. This is ballparks what they think we cost. Everyone good at moving forward with these? Would that be an appropriate way of addressing that?
That's kind of what I'm looking for, yeah.
Okay.
Yep, Curlier, good. Public outreach. Oh, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry,
Kevin.
just did have one more question, maybe of Eric, on this. Parking for the proposed stadium, would that be at, across the street, across Jackson, I believe? And would that be part of any traffic study being done, potential parking?
We are looking at different options for parking. I don't want to say here is exactly how we'll do it, but certainly parking needs to be addressed at this, and we're looking at a couple different ways of resolving that. So then I think that would be, I mean, I'm not a traffic engineer, but I don't know whether parking study and traffic study are one and the same, or whether they're 2 unrelated things, but we would need to address parking for the stadium as well as traffic coming to and from it as part of our due diligence.
Yep. And specific to public outreach, we mentioned that particularly if the funding source is TIF, is MIRA, there is a definite public process that's involved with that. You spoke out wanting to talk about this, be able to almost even bifurcate this piece out. So there's a legit discussion on that. I think it's a great opportunity for us to work on our civic engagement skills. It wouldn't hurt us, by the way, to have. I did find this out. There's a lot of opinions and a lot of interest in this whole Creekside quarter. So I think at least participation should be pretty decent. So I also don't want to just split it out and then have everybody else forget about the rest of the plan. So it might be an interesting opportunity, though, to get a lot of response. But does anyone have any issue about thinking expanding civic engagement process for not just MIRA, but maybe even a little extra on the stadium? Yes, sir.
To talk about what? Right? The same
People's
things you just talked about in terms of, we don't have enough information in terms of what all this stuff looks like, now going out to the public with, well, we don't know what any of this stuff looks like. What are your opinions on it?
So speaking through the MIRA, where we're gonna, well, actually,
That's why I said when we get to the MIRA part,
Yeah.
we would have an actual thing to
correct. Yep.
talk to the public about.
And I guess I'm thinking that the civic engagement doesn't start tomorrow. It starts when we really get into earnest on the MIRA plan. Go ahead.
Well, I guess my response to that is I think that the MIRA portion of it would happen a long ways down the road, and we would have invested a lot into this by then. So that's my only concern, is how much do we invest in it, not knowing really what the public desire is going to be for us doing the stadium in Hawthorne Park.
You go ahead, Mike.
Well, I think what I would want to gauge, as just a member of the public, I'm really intrigued by this idea. I think it's cool, but not cool enough to write a blank check. So what I would want to try to gauge with public engagement, with civic engagement, is how many people just feel like, no, absolutely not, we hate this idea, you should never even consider it, versus, yes, whatever it takes, this is the best thing ever, and we don't care what you do to MIRA or taxes or whatever. And then there will be a subgroup that says, well, yeah, I think it's cool, but we need some more information, which is what we're talking with Eric about right now. But if we get an overwhelming, every single person who shows up thinks this is the stupidest thing ever, or every person who shows up thinks that they'll write a blank check themselves that night, I mean, that is insight for us into what's the public perception of this project.
And I think from a timing standpoint, again, if a stadium project is funded via Mura, back to what we're saying is, hey, let's see that list, because we don't want to go, there's going to be a number where to advance this stadium to a point where we think we've got a number that we can live with. If it costs us too much to get there, that's why we got to see those numbers up front. But long story short is the stadium does have to go with Mura just based on the funding.
We don't even know what Mira is going to generate.
We have ballparks.
We have estimates.
Yeah, we got a lot of ballparks running around. Yes, sir.
Well, one thing I just want to point out as we think about public process, because I do think it's important we engage the public, but we also do need to make sure that we have something more concrete to engage them with. And as I think about where we stand right now, I mean, we're talking about this public taking on the stadium and the design build and all of this stuff. And to me, I think about this as sort of within the context of an assumption, which I think is a reasonable assumption to make, but it is still an assumption that negotiations and everything that we're doing continue in exactly the same way that they're going. When we originally were presented this idea from this developer, it included the stadium as a privately built piece. If something changes with the developer, we may see a different developer who is interested in the stadium as a privately built piece. So I think part of why I want us to be cautious about over-committing or over-promising as we go through this process is that if we go too far down one road and then things change on the private side, those may be things that become a lost and wasted cost that a private developer may have come on and done. And so, I think we need some kind of a public process for this, but I would hesitate to start a public process until we actually have contracts signed with a developer, with the Emeralds, and with Major League Baseball, because to me, once we get those pieces sort of signed out, that really lays open the scope of like, what is it that the city is going to need to backfill if we want to complete Creekside Quarter with the vision as it was originally presented to us, or do we want to change it? To Mr. Keating's point, is there other ways that the city could address its concerns around beautification of Hawthorne Park? Are there other projects? USL, we had a letter of interest from them that we signed a couple weeks ago, and so we know they're looking at Medford. Is that something that goes into this process? I mean, I think right now, baseball is still the most well-developed proposal. We have a team that has been successful in Oregon for 80 years. We're looking to pick up a lot of opportunity with the Emeralds. They have shown a lot of interest and commitment to Medford. I think continuing the process forward as we have it today is the slam dunk right option. I shouldn't say slam dunk. It's the best bet we have. I hope it becomes slam dunk. We win. It's great. We don't have to spend a lot of money. Hallelujah. Home run. Yeah. Home run. So yeah, home run. Oh my gosh, terrible, mixing my sports. But I also think things could change quite a bit. And so what I would hate to do is to run into a huge public process where we're asking people for opinions on something that doesn't even bear any fruit. That's we know people have busy lives, they've got a lot of stuff going on, and to ask for them to take time out of their lives and engage with us is an ask. And so I want to make sure that we're doing that when we have something that they actually are, their opinions and their input is actually going to help us drive to a better decision, as opposed to just file it away while we wait for things to be resolved. So that's kind of how I want to get to some of these things signed, and then we can start talking about having a more robust public process.
Yeah, I think all of this, we want a little bit better definition on scope and cost of this project. And once we have that I think will kind of show the path of of full civic engagement or public participation in the process. I think it'll be there. However, looking at that and thinking, let's at least find something more enhanced than typical, I think that all seems reasonable. Yeah.
Last word on this is we had a vote 8 days ago where any citizen could go and say their piece on a topic, and guarantee you there was more discussions about baseball by like tenfold than there was at Conference Center. And I was very interesting reading lots of internet comments about the people on the internet were very vocal in opposition, but then the vote turns out that people were supportive of the lodging tax measure, which, you know, identifies as the Creekside Quarter if you look in the voters pamphlet. So there is always something about people being very loud, but not necessarily people being very loud being the majority. So just some food for thought there. And I'm going to assume that no one, if we have some agreement with the conference center, there's not going to be a bunch of, hey, let's have people do a bunch of public input about where they do the conference center enough. It seems kind of a little one-sided in terms of which projects have priority and which might not.
Okay. Eric, what else would you maybe need?
I think for now that gives me good direction in terms of what y'all are looking for. So
Okay.
we'll be bringing stuff back in terms of concrete next steps and city manager and staff reports to make sure that there's comfort on the various different things to keep moving this forward, because a lot of the steps have some cost involved. We'll give you an idea of what that cost would be, where it would come from, and how it would help move the project forward. And keep going, and then also the negotiations keep going and keep you all updated.
Okay. Perfect.
Does that sound right to everyone
Yep.
on the dais?
Oh,
All right.
sorry. Let me speak for everyone all of a sudden. Sorry.
The mayor's spoken for me, but I'm also I think that sounds good. Thanks, Eric.
All right, so we are on to our Transportation Safety Action Plan. Dan Worth, Public Works Director. Carl McNair. What is your title? Transportation Manager. Hey, this is right up your alley. Boulevard.
It's a home run.
It's a home run, yep.
I just want to make a couple of brief comments to introduce the topic. We're talking about transportation safety. Obviously, an important topic for our community.
Dan.
Oh, there is a microphone, power button.
Eric is falling down on the job.
Is that better?
Are you new
I can
here?
hear myself now.
Are you new here or something?
Okay, it's an important topic, and council has made policy decisions, at least 3 of them in the last several years, to reinforce the importance of transportation safety on our street network. One was in 2018 when council adopted our transportation system plan that we're currently operating off of. That included a goal to make our transportation network safe for all users and all modes of transportation. In 2023, council adopted a policy to achieve a goal of 0 fatal or serious injury accidents by 2035. This is an initiative that's really a nationwide initiative. Communities adopting what they call a Vision Zero policy. And we raised our hand and said we want to be a part of that. And then in 2024, partially because we adopted that Vision Zero policy, we were able to obtain a grant from the Federal Highway Administration to develop a transportation safety action plan, which council approved accepting that grant, and that is a topic that we're going to be addressing here over the next few minutes. Before I turn it over to Carl to talk about the details of that plan and the planning effort, I just want to point out that this is not a Public Works centric initiative. It's cross-departmental. We've got a good team working on it. Carl is here. He's played a major role. Planning has been involved. Carlo Palladino has been an integral part of the process. Tanner Farrington, the fire marshal, sitting behind me, has also been a very important part of the process. And I believe we have a representative from our consultant, Kittleson and Associates, Amy Griffiths, remotely connected when he's nodding her head. So all are available to address any particular topics or answer any questions you may have. I just wanted to acknowledge the participation of all those people, and with that, I will turn it over to Carl to go into the details of the presentation.
Thank you, Dan. Good evening, Mayor and councilors. I do want to start by also acknowledging Carla and Tanner for their countless hours they've contributed to this project, and want to, there we go. Also introduce to you our transportation safety action hero at the top of the screen there. I'm hoping to get Arnold Schwarzenegger to play him, but sorry for the dad jokes. I always have to start with a dad joke. All right. I believe the last time council saw this was when you approved the consultant contract in September 2024. Tonight we're going to provide an update on what we've been working on for the last year or so, and also gather feedback on what we've done prior to developing the final plan, which you'll see again in the spring for adoption. So I'll go over the project purpose and then explain what we've done with community engagement and existing conditions analysis before presenting the draft recommendations and explaining how those recommendations have been prioritized to date. We'll also talk about how we intend to monitor the performance of these projects going forward. So Resolution 2023-75 authorized and approved the city's commitment to a goal of achieving zero roadway fatalities and serious injuries by 2035. The same resolution provided support for the city to pursue a grant through the Federal Highways Safe Streets for All program to prepare this TSAP, or Transportation Safety Action Plan. That grant was successful, and council approved a contract with Kittleson, as I mentioned, in September 2024 to help develop the plan. This planning process has included a concerted effort to engage the public along the way, and that's kind of been broken into 3 phases. During phase 1, we asked the public to map their safety concerns using an online mapping tool that we had, and while that was going on, we analyzed the existing conditions to look at crash trends and high crash locations. Then during phase 2, we developed recommendations to address the issues we found in phase 1, and we've presented those to the public at both an in-person open house and had an online version of the open house as well. Now we're entering phase 3, which is really putting all this work together into a final plan so that we can use that to go after future funding opportunities. Along the way, we've engaged our advisory committee, transportation commission, and the planning commission kind of at each point in each phase, and we'll continue to engage them as we finalize the plan. So I just wanted to touch on our advisory committee for this project. It had over 20 people on it, various government agencies and other stakeholder groups. We had other road authorities, Jackson County and ODOT, as well as first responders, Providence Hospital staff, RVTD, and the school district. So quite an extensive group. So kind of a project recap. The first couple boxes here are really that phase 1 that I talked about, where we organized the project, collected data, gathered input, and analyzed the data. The green box phase 2 is where we're at now, where we've developed strategies and treatments to identify the issues identified in phase 1, and we're at the tail end of gathering input. We've already gone to the public and our advisory groups and now we're in front of you. We'll be coming back to you in the spring for adoption, as I mentioned. So what did we learn? This graph kind of gives you an idea of how Medford compares to other population groups in terms of traffic fatalities. It's important to note that this rate is per million population. So Medford, with a population of about 85,000, the 56 annual traffic fatality rates is actual, that's per million. So our actual number over the study period that we looked at was 4.8 traffic fatalities per year.
Carl, what's the study period? Oh, 4.8 per year.
4.8 per year, yes.
Over the, okay.
And the study period was 2018 to 2022.
What was the study geographical area? The city of Medford?
City of Medford limits, yes. We did. We only excluded crashes on Interstate 5 from the study. So for really, Medford's kind of middle of the road compared to other Oregon communities our size. You'll notice Jackson County and Oregon as a state are both significantly higher. That's pretty typical for rural areas where you have higher speed roadways with that are much less forgiving. If you leave the roadway on some of the county roads, there's not a lot of recovery time. I think it's also important to note here that the U.S. traffic fatality rate of 125 per million is more than double what Canada's is, 3 times higher than the European average, and 6 times higher than some Scandinavian countries. The safe system approach, which I'll discuss a little later, has been adopted in many of these places several decades ago, and that's attributed to some of these lower rates. And so as Dan mentioned, this is kind of a nationwide effort at this point that the federal government has been pushing to really try and address some of these issues throughout the country. As for Medford specifically, we looked at crash data from 2018 to 2022. This was the most recent crash data available from ODOT. 2023 has since been released, and we were able to incorporate that into some of the site-specific investigations we did a little later in the project after that had been released, but for our overall systemic evaluation, that wasn't available. We've gotten some questions from some of the other groups we presented to about why we didn't use like the Medford police data, which is, they have up through much more current, up through 2024 already. MPD data, just the data that's available in like the database, the fields that you have are not nearly as robust as what ODOT has, and it's not really apples to apples with the statewide stuff and that we would look at. ODOT goes through an extensive process of gathering from all the police departments, sheriff's offices, OSP, DMV reported accidents, and compiling all that. And really the types of analysis we did would not be able to be done with the MPD data.
Hang on real quick, Kevin.
I'm sorry, we do have just a number of fatalities in Medford, though. Our police data would show that for the year 2024, would it not?
Yes, we do have that on the MPD.
Do you have that number on the top of your head?
Not off the top of my head, sorry.
It would be nice to know if it's, lower than what we're seeing here, but thank you.
What we did find was that overall crashes through the study period declined, but the fatalities and serious injuries increased over that period. And kind of why do we focus on the fatal and serious injury crashes? That these are the crashes that people don't walk away from. Serious injuries means that they're not walking away from the crash, and fatalities, obviously, they're not. They have the biggest impact on the community and change people's lives. And internationally, that safe system approach that I talked about, the way they've achieved success in lowering these numbers is by focusing on those as opposed to focusing on all crashes, which is kind of historically more traditional way we've looked at it. So also kind of specific to us, we were able to identify types of crashes and types of driver behaviors that are contributing to more to the fatal and serious injury crashes. I don't want to get you into all the weeds of the analysis, but this slide illustrates how speeding, impaired driving, and not wearing a seatbelt account for a higher percentage of those serious crashes than they do for all crashes. And it also highlights we have a major problem with distracted driving. 61% of all crashes, that's just the confirmed cases of distracted driving. Counselor?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
No, that's okay. So this data you said is Medford specific.
Yes, correct.
Was this extrapolated from the larger ODOT data, or was this from a different source?
This is from the ODOT data set.
Okay.
Yeah.
And did I understand you that this was studying all crashes on I-5?
We excluded the crashes on I-5, so these are Medford city
Great.
streets.
That's the exact opposite of what I thought you said, and that makes way more sense.
Okay, thank you. So after going through all the data, we identified some emphasis areas and risk factors. Emphasis areas are types of crashes, and risk factors are kind of environmental concerns that are contributing to those crashes.
Oh, Carl, I should have asked this ages ago. When you say crash, is it just car and car, or does it involve pedestrians? Does it involve bike? Is it all modes that count as a crash?
It is all modes. They all involve at least one car, but it could be car versus car, car versus pedestrian.
Okay.
It could be any of those.
Yeah, got it.
So, yeah, these emphasis areas, risk factors, these are things where we either saw they were contributing a high proportion to fatal and serious injury crashes. So, over 10% of the fatal and serious injury crashes have these factors, or these crash types, for example, may have a low percentage on overall crashes, but have a higher percentage or are overrepresented in the fatal and serious injury crashes. So what I mean by that is when you look at like vulnerable road user crashes, pedestrians, bicycles, motorcycles all make up about 2% of all the crashes on the system, whereas they make up a much higher percentage of the fatal and serious injury crashes. That makes sense. These, vulnerable road users don't have a steel cage around them, and so when crashes happen that involve them, they tend to have more severe outcomes. We also mapped all the crashes and ranked locations based on the number of crashes and the severity of those crashes. The red lines on this map indicate what we have dubbed the high injury network, and the dots are intersections included in that high injury network. For the segments, we mapped those for both. We separated out vulnerable road users, where are they getting injured and killed, and for all motor vehicles, where are those injuries and fatalities happening, and then we overlapped. We included everything ultimately in the high injury network, but there was a lot of overlap that we found. So after analyzing all that data, we developed some recommendations to address those emphasis areas and risk factors and some specific locations. I'll explain the approach we took to that. So this diagram kind of gives a good overview of the process. We developed both system-wide countermeasures as well as site-specific countermeasures for priority locations. These were prioritized based on several factors, including community support, cost, ease of implementation, and the recommendations' ability to address the risk factors and emphasis areas. We used the safe system approach, which I've mentioned a few times, to organize those treatments and strategies into groups and to ensure we were addressing kind of each of these categories that have been identified on a national level. Safer people, safer vehicles, safer speeds, safer land use, safer roads, and post-crash care. They're all part of the whole safe system, as it's dubbed. We used resources from Federal Highway and ODOT to help identify specific countermeasures, and then we presented those countermeasures to the stakeholder groups and the public to gather input on how much community support there was for those various countermeasures. And after we gathered that community input, we prioritized all the strategies and treatments. So we based our prioritization on our ability to implement them and their ability to address the emphasis areas and risk factors in the plan. Community feedback was included in our implementation score, so it's not driving the decisions, but it is definitely included in there as part of the considerations and part of the prioritization. So what are those things? This slide shows the treatments that were identified for safer roads, safer speeds categories. The bold items highlight the treatments that were identified as near-term priorities. These are all systemic treatments, and so treatments are infrastructure things that we can do. We also have strategies which are non-infrastructure. And systemic means that we could really deploy these types of things across the city. Not that we're going to put them everywhere around the city. They need to go to the right locations, but they're tools that we can use throughout the city. As far as strategies, these, as I mentioned, are the non-infrastructure things and make up, we have these in every category. Again, the bold items are the strategies that are categorized as near-term priorities. These are the rest of the strategies on this slide, and you may notice, I went through them pretty quickly, but a lot of those bolded strategies are focused on public awareness and education. This is really because those are low-cost things that we can do through coordination with other agencies or other partner groups to reach a lot of people. And I always think of, when I was young, drunk driving, like we had the crashed cars come to my elementary school that MAD brought to the elementary school. That made a big impact on me as a kid, and I think currently in our society, drunk driving is a lot less of an issue, a lot less common, prolific than it was 40, 50 years ago. And so that stuff takes time, but over time you can really make a big difference in people's perceptions. Also want to highlight on this slide EMS and crash data integration. This is something we actually tried to do through this project, was look at the data that our emergency services are getting and our hospitals have to try and correlate those to our crash data that we were looking at. We couldn't quite get there as part of this project, but we are continuing to have those conversations. Tanner Farrington from our fire department's been a big part of that, coordinating with our, it's called ATAB, Trauma Advisory Board, but they have a lot of hospital data that we're hoping we will be able to use in the future to help us track things. So we, in addition to those systemic treatments and strategies, we looked at 6 specific locations. So these are all on the high injury network, and we kind of took off locations on the high injury network where we've recently done projects or have projects planned that would change the safety picture. And these 6 kind of rose to the top out of what was left. And so for each of these 6 sites, Kittleson reviewed the detailed crash data and the context and came up with a list of near-term and long-term strategies and treatments that could be applied to the corridor or intersection. These projects, evaluations that were done, they're not like projects that are ready to go pull off the shelf and get a grant for tomorrow, but they're a good step towards that and a good launching off point to where we can further develop a project. And I'll use my example to point out why we didn't get as far as having a project. Barnett Road was one of those corridors. We talked a lot on our project management team how big projects that are going to impact a lot of people, a primary emergency response route, lots of jobs, lots of impact. We don't want to put something into this plan that locks us into any particular treatment. This is something that's going to need a lot more discussion, a lot more community involvement as we move forward. But this plan does tell us what's going on and gives us some ideas that we can look at and investigate further as time moves on. Barnett Road, when we looked at the crash data, all of the all the emphasis areas were identified, the vulnerable users, et cetera, and 3 of the 4 risk factors, darkness did not appear to be a major issue in the crashes on Barnett. But we have a red light camera intersection planned for Barnett Highland. That's in the works, and the others will, as I mentioned, need some more work. But if we can, find a package of treatments that can help reduce fatal and serious injury crashes on Barnett, we can have a pretty large impact. Over the 5-year study period, there were 16 fatal and serious injury crashes on this corridor, when you count the intersections and the corridor, and so that's a little over 3 per year, crashes where people aren't walking away. So I know that was a lot of information. I've tried to keep it moving along. One thing we've struggled with is really trying to boil the information down from this project without losing the important context. But this slide really tries to boil down what are our next steps and how are we going to implement this. First step is really to secure additional funding and staff time to implement the plan. We can do some of this with current resources, but some of it's going to take additional resources. And I'm calling them steps, but really the other 2 boxes can happen concurrently as well. Those include starting to implement treatments, both systematically and at the priority locations we looked at, as well as improving upon our education and enforcement activities that we're currently doing. We're going to track our progress as we implement things. Of course, we are planning to track what you'd expect as far as crash metrics, total number of crashes, fatal and serious injury crashes. Something we're also looking at is emergency response times, and then also those other emergency medical service records that we're not sure what we can do with those yet, but we're looking at those as far as ongoing tracking as well. This is something that I think is unique to Medford's Transportation Safety Action Plan. It's not something that is common in safety action plans for sure. Looking at the emergency response metrics, Tanner was on our project management team, really helped us see the value of doing this. We don't want things that we're doing to improve traffic safety to then have negative impacts on the safety and our ability to address other emergencies in the community. So we're planning to track those things going forward and make sure that we can address these community impacts as well and continue addressing the other emergency response and community impacts that are coming from those. All right, so as a reminder, this is really a check-in. We're kind of at the end of this planning process. We've developed all this stuff, and we're going to be heading into developing our final safety plan, which we can then adopt, and it will help us help position us for future funding. I want to say that here too that nothing in this plan is a requirement at this point. It's all data for us and a toolbox of things that we can then implement as opportunities come available for additional funding, or we have our TSP coming up. We can potentially implement some of those things through the TSP as well and have further discussions about them. So with that, we have a couple questions up on the screen to help prompt council feedback, but we're really open to any feedback you may have or additional questions on the plan.
Mr. Cart.
I appreciate all this, Carl. Obviously, from my personal life, transportation safety is something that is near and dear. It's something that I've spent many years working on, but I've also seen a lot of attempts at transportation safety that ultimately are at best not productive and sometimes are counterproductive. So I appreciate your comments about making sure that you are focusing on implementation details that are not going to take us the wrong way. I think it's easy to talk about zero safety, but there's so many pieces that go into transportation safety. There's so many different communities that have attempted so many different things, and yet when you look at like nationwide trends, things like the rise in the purchase of SUVs and pickup trucks have had a dramatically negative impact on safety. It doesn't matter what we do in Medford. It's hard to stop a 8,000-pound SUV when it and a bicycle want to dance. And so there's also been an increase, obviously, with cell phones and distracted driving. And I mean, for Medford to take on what I've heard people call digitally drunk driving, which I think is a great phrase, that's a huge task for the little town of Medford to take on. And so one of the things that I want to make sure that we do here is that we stay grounded in things that we know have real impact, that are not going to be super cost prohibitive, that are not going to be exploratory, that are not going to be things that may accidentally take Medford down the wrong path, but are really grounded in what we do know that works, and not try to solve nationwide problems. Our traffic fatalities are unconscionably higher than other parts of the developed world, but that is not Medford's problem to solve. And so I just think that it's easy to see these numbers and understanding the impact of what those kind of traffic fatalities and injuries mean on our community, but we also can't solve the national problems that lead to that. What we need to make sure we focus on is what are the local problems that we can really do that we know are going to help move in a positive direction. Looking at the chart you presented right in the beginning, I think we're clearly doing a lot of those right things already. Our traffic fatality rate is significantly lower than our state. It's significantly lower than the nation. So we're doing a lot of stuff already that's positive, and I just want to make sure we're being grounded as we approach this as we go through this, because I've seen these get off the rails and start chasing things that ultimately don't help from a traffic safety perspective. So, thanks.
Thank you.
All right, Garrett.
Thank you so much for all the work you've been doing, planning fire safety as well. I thought it was fantastic information to get and to receive. I echo several of the thoughts Mr. Card had about making sure that we have a safe environment in Medford and doing what we can to improve safety locally. We're not going to be able to solve everything, but I think there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that we can get at. Carl, your comment about, when you were a kid in school and they'd bring in crash cars from drunk driving, and that made a big impact on a lot of students, and that over the decades carried through today, and seeing fewer drunk driving accidents over time. I mean, I'd love to see some more public education like that, maybe specifically for distracted driving and cell phone crashes. I think that might be really valuable. I especially want to see public education about those kind of things, but also when we're making systemic infrastructure changes, I think it's critical that we build public competence and understanding about those changes, because that ensures that we're able to continue to make a safer system overall. Sometimes I feel that there's big infrastructure changes and a kind of a weak public interaction, and then we get some blowback on it, and that could be counterproductive. I was hoping you could tell me how does the TSAP and the TSP interact? I understand they're two separate things, both dealing with transportation and traffic, but what are we kind of looking at when we're seeing both of them?
Yeah, so they are two separate plans. That's not like the TSAP's going to be an appendix to the transportation system plan. It'll be its own standalone document. Mm-hmm. And I think the TSAP can really inform the TSP. The TSP is really where you set, here's where we're going to spend our transportation dollars. Okay. And so the TSAP will have strategies, projects that you could potentially choose to put into the TSP. Yeah.
Okay, but they'll self-reference each other and they'll be, I guess, coherent
yes,
with each other.
That's
okay.
the intent, yes.
I think, my other big concerns with everything we're going to do is to make sure that in the near term, and I'm glad you said it, more pedestrian crossings and pedestrian awareness, because, I go along West Main every day and I see people running across the road, and it's so unsafe. So, looking at things like that would make me feel a lot safer in Medford. Traffic flow, to make sure that we're not just having frustrated drivers constantly coming to a stop for no reason. And then always looking at the long-term costs on our infrastructure. Because it's important that even when we're building safe infrastructure, we're building infrastructure that will not cost as much over time. So I thought it was a fantastic job, and thank you so much.
All right, thank you for the feedback.
Jessica? I'm going to, okay, Mr. Keating.
Do we have data? I'm hoping that we have data going back decades as far as the number of accidents we've had in the city of Medford, or the number of high injury fatality crashes. Do we have that data?
We have at least 10 years of data. I know I looked at 10 years of data, looking back at how we've been trending over the last 10 years. And
it's been downward. Give me that.
Our fatalities, I mean, year to year you see a lot of variation, but when you look at kind of the 5-year moving average, it's been going up in the last 5 years of the 10-year period.
Okay. That's good. Thank you.
Thank you.
So kind of tagging back on to the TSP comment, TSP is financially constrained.
Correct.
The TSAP, as it's presented, at least what I heard, is there's really not a funding mechanism for these strategies. That will be something that you will be looking for grants, but I'm assuming more outside sources than inside sources as far as that goes.
Yeah, I mean, part of the intent of developing the TSAP is that there is, I believe it's still available. The program may be coming to an end. There was a federal program set up to address traffic safety issues, and one of the requirements is that you have an adopted transportation safety action plan to apply for those. ODOT also has safety funding available, so this sets us up to better apply for both those sources. And if, funding tends to come and go in transportation, and it kind of gets us ready for when it comes.
I think it maybe a general concern of an elected might be, hey, we approve a transportation system action plan. Probably if we added up all the projects, it's pretty expensive. And did we just accidentally sign up the citizens for a lot of funding? And I think what I'm hearing is no, but, or maybe with the pause, maybe we need to talk about that more.
No, this plan does not sign us up for spending any money by requirement. I think really the spend will come when we'll look at that as part of the TSP and see if we want to dedicate some funding to safety or specific projects through that TSP process.
I do have another follow-up, but go ahead.
So I do have a question. I think you should be able to answer it because you participate in all these things. But if I remember correctly, we're slated to redo the intersection at like 10th and either Tripp or Cottage. And the reason why we were going to do that is because of the amount of fatalities there over so many years. So what plan is that part of?
So
Do you know what I'm talking about?
I do. Yeah, that project is now complete. It was restriping the road through there, and that came out of ODOT's safety funding plan.
Oh, okay. I thought it was more significant upgrade to that, but okay, good to know.
Mike?
To make sure I'm understanding right, this is kind of similar, it sounds like, to the downtown plan that we just pulled in, where like, this is an aspirational plan. We all agree these are things we'd like to do, but by incorporating the downtown plan, we're not necessarily committing we're doing all of these things. So TSAP is going to be similar. These are things that we see as valuable, and we want to memorialize these and say these are things to work toward. But we're not thereby committing ourselves to saying we got to find funding for everything that's part of the TSAP.
That's correct.
And we can look at these TSAP, some of the areas, and try to, I guess, double dip in some spaces and say, hey, this isn't already an intersection or a section that needed some work anyway. We were going to have this on our radar in the next biennium or two. Let's loop in whatever we're going to do to line up with the TSAP. Is that a fair way to say we could try to approach it?
I think that's absolutely true. What I envision this as being is, as projects are identified for capacity improvements and for other reasons in the TSAP, we'll have the list of options that we can implement as part of that project when we get the funding to do the bigger project. I like to think every street project we do makes it safer. But this is a way to systematically ensure that we have the tools identified to be able to do that when we get the funding for those projects that are identified in the TSP.
Kevin?
Yeah, real quick. It's obviously with anything new, right? You can have protected bike lanes, protected bicycle lanes, and then that does a lot in terms of keeping general public safe while they're, a distance away from moving vehicles. I think it's always a struggle when you have these legacy streets and people have an expectation of how things are, and if you make changes to them, sometimes the public is okay with that, sometimes the public is less okay with that. It's just a difficult process. I really enjoyed what Mr. Card said. I mean, unfortunately, certain public behaviors are just out of our bounds, and it's really unfortunate that we do have incredible amount of distracted driving causing accidents in Medford streets. But if there's some solution there, I mean, I imagine every city in this country would be adopting it immediately to try to mitigate the effects that has. So appreciate the work here. I mean, it's always a little interesting of how it gets laid out as the years rolled on, but it's a good baseline to go off of. Thank you.
Thank you.
So as a follow-up, I thought it was really good that you included those performance metrics in trying to track your success, when we say system, it's just like, we go do something citywide and then it doesn't move the needle. So the idea of keeping track of that as you go to make sure that we're implementing what works here, I thought was I appreciated that being included in there. Strategies or treatments should be added. In my day job, I'm told that all you have to do is put up a sign, and that changes everything. So you might want to consider that. Just more signs. As far as near-term actions, I thought I understood you to say that Barnett corridor was 3 fatalities per year?
That was serious injuries and fatalities together. So.
Okay. At any rate, that one seems like it might need emphasis, I guess. I don't know. All right, anything else? Appreciate it, Carl.
All right, thank you.
Anybody need break? Or are you guys ready to go?
Yeah, this will be really quick.
We're denying all grants from here on out. Is that what I'm hearing?
Zach's feeling really fresh. He's good. I'm ready. He's good to
You
go.
okay? Are you okay, Zach?
No break needed.
Pictures from my secret Facebook or something.
Yes, sir.
We ready to roll?
Yeah.
Okay, good evening, Mayor and Council. Ryan Martin, your Chief Financial Officer. In conjunction with Michelle King, our Planning Director, if there's any questions, I thought the news cameras were here for this, but they left a little early, so this evening we'll be talking about general fund grants and asking 3 questions. The first question is, should $226,800 be moved from non-competitive general fund grants to competitive grants, competitive grants? Should the continuum of care allocation be made non-competitively in the current biennium, and how would council prefer this process to work in the future? Now I'll give you a plethora of information for you to make these decisions. So first of all, just as a summary, Medford is one of the few cities that still provides general fund grants, and we've done so for about 25 years now. Average is about $500,000 a biennium, and the last biennium and the current biennium is just under $700,000. Every year in the past, or every biennium in the past, these have been separated between competitive and non-competitive. In our budget debrief after the 2023-25 budget cycle, so about 2.5 years ago, we looked at this process, and it was always listed as a budget issue in the budget. And so the non-competitive ones were just set. We continued to fund the same organizations over and over, and then the competitive portion was done differently, which I'll go over in just a moment. And when we looked at this, there was never really any discussion at the budget committee level. We wondered if the budget committee should be making the decision of the non-competitive grants that are funded, and so we decided to not include this as a budget issue anymore. The unforeseen consequence of that was that we basically had this as a lump sum in the budget, and it was not separated in the current budget under or between competitive and non-competitive. Looking at the prior allocations, just the last biennium, for example, about 60% of the general fund grants goes to non-competitive, and then about 40% to competitive. For the competitive grant process, it is reviewed by the Housing and Community Development Commission. They accept the applications for funding similar to the CCIF process, and then they provide recommendations on who gets allocated what monies. For this biennium, the application period just closed, and then in January, the recommendations will be provided to council. There's about $770,000 of requests from 22 organizations, and only $227,000 is available. And as I mentioned, staff will present these recommendations from the HCDC January 7th. Looking at the non-competitive grants, these are just grants that have been carried over, for the most part, over time. For the last 4 biennia, there's been 4 organizations and 5 programs that have been allocated funding. The Addictions Recovery Center, 2 from Access for the Fresh Alliance Food Rescue, the Continuum of Care Coordinator for Community Works, a Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Advocate position, and the Small Business Development Center for SOU. So looking at some of the considerations, the Community Works grant was approved in September by council for $160,000. This is for a position that works very closely in the police department with victims. It allows victims to speak with somebody who's not a sworn officer. A lot of times they feel more comfortable speaking with this person, and the position could not continue without this funding. The Addictions Recovery Center and SOU no longer provide the programs that they previously received grants for. Access Fresh Food Alliance, they requested the $35,000 that was previously given to them. And the non-competitive grant, they requested this through the competitive process. And Medford is the only city that participates in Continuum of Care funding. So we do have current biennium recommendations and future biennia recommendations, and then I'll get back to those 3 questions in case anybody forgot what they are, like I probably did. So our current biennium recommendations are to allocate the $60,000 for the Continuum of Care position through Access. They're counting on this funding, and they believe that it would be available in this biennium. To remove the remaining $227,000 to the competitive portion to allow more money for that larger pool of requests. The total available would be almost $500,000 in that case. And to present a resolution on January 7th, which is the same meeting when we'll provide recommendations for the competitive grants, we would provide a little bit more resolution, making it clear what the process is moving forward and what the grants will be if council wants to fund, say, the Continuum of Care coordinator position. For future biennia, we recommend continuing to fund the Community Works position for reasons that I mentioned, and then all other general fund grants would be considered competitive. So now we're back to the direction we're looking for and the 3 questions, and I'll turn it over to you, Mayor, and either I or Michelle can answer any questions you have.
So really, is 1 and 2 actually together? Because it would be 286.8, right?
Correct.
Okay. Go ahead.
Is there a better way to fund that Community Works position and just take it out of this process altogether?
Yes, I would agree with that. I think there's a better way to do it.
Okay, I got Kevin, Mike, Nick.
For the Continuum of Care. So I've been through the whole process because I've been here a while. Drink. When we really got engaged and helped create it or whatever it was, there was a lot of excitement in terms of getting community partners, nonprofits, whomever together and have kind of a vision of how things would get organized and go forward. And the first director of that, in my opinion, did a really good job. And then Connie, and then she decided to go do something else. And then I don't know how many other people have held that position, but from a council perspective, did they come and present to us, or are they one of the people that came? I don't think so. Yes?
Yeah, I was going to say yes. So I think personally, and this is going to come out because I have bias being on the board there, and just the work that's going on right now, I would highly recommend funding this position at least for this year, and then if you want to make a consideration for next year, or is this going to be for both years or just this year?
It would be $60,000 for the biennium.
For the total, I would go ahead and do it for these next 2 years, and then we're either, I think that'll shake out a lot.
So the position is currently filled.
Yeah.
So my recommendation, I have a lot more to say. So just the continuum of care thing. Personally, I think we could budget 60, but I think it should be 30-30 in terms of, right? Because that's how it gets done, right? 30-30, like 30 for this biennium, 30 for next biennium, or does it just go 60 and here's your 2 years?
I'm not positive on that. I would have to check.
Okay. I'm kind of thinking of that like that. Like, prove, like, show me some progress on what's happening before we fund it for another year after an initial. Does that make sense?
No, I follow it. I probably would just.
You might disagree
I'd
with
say
it,
pull the
but
trigger, but yeah, I totally follow what you're saying. Michelle?
Hi, Michelle King, your planning director. My understanding is that we get, that Access would request, provide us an invoice, and it's twice a year, so it's $15,000 payments, I think, how it was paid in the past. So it would be incremental, so it's not all at once.
so it's just as far as that discussion, I'm in favor of budgeting the entire amount. That way it's there, but June, whatever, having them come back and give a positive report about what they're doing. That's my recommendation.
Does anyone have a super strong feeling one way or another as far as that goes?
Just the continuum of care piece.
This is just the continuum of care piece, which is going to set the table for question 1. So it's going to be allocated with potential clawback of $30,000. Can you figure out a way to write that up? No?
We can figure out a way to write that up, yeah.
Okay.
I believe in you. Thank you.
So that takes us to the 226.8, essentially programs, other than Fresh Alliance, 2 of the programs don't exist anymore, and then Fresh Alliance has already applied for competitive grant, so this seems pretty much like housekeeping. Yep, okay.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
So is that 226 allocated?
No,
It's budgeted.
budgeted. It is,
I'm sorry. I didn't understand what you just talked about at the end. So,
sorry.
so I understand. So the ARC isn't doing their thing anymore, and the small business thing I just read, and is getting shut down. So that's that amount, I'm assuming. That's 226,800.
Correct, yes.
Well, plus Fresh Alliance, right? That was considered non-competitive?
Yes.
Okay.
So is the Fresh Alliance part of the 226?
They would not get a direct non-competitive part.
They'd have to
to apply.
So whatever money that they've got in the past is going to go put in the bucket with 22 organizations or 22 asks.
Yep.
And okay, I understand that. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
Ryan, can you help me understand the Community Works position a little bit? We've already approved it, I get that. But you said there's other ways to fund it, and just before we embark on that, a thought, if it's actually funding the salary of a human being, it should be something that's steady and reliable. They shouldn't have to wonder every year if they have a job. And also in my day job, I deal with this situation, and that type of position is very important. It's very common for domestic violence and sexual assault victims to recant or decide they'd rather just stay home and get beaten once in a while, but at least their kids have somewhere to stay. Very common. And this kind of a position is important to help that not happen. So what are your thoughts about funding it in a more steady way so that person can have a steady job and we can know that resource continues to be available without re-upping every year?
And my thought would be that it would be budgeted every biennium separate from the general fund grant process. And so to fund that would reduce that from the general fund grants, and then it could be paid for just out of the general fund of the city. So it's a net zero, but that is one way to do it.
So would that be something attributable to like the police budget or just a separate item? Or is that person, they work with the police, but are they employed within the umbrella of the police department?
No, they're not. They're employed with Community Works.
Okay.
But that is an option. My guess is it would be paid out of the police budget, but then we would reduce the general fund grants to pay for it. So it doesn't impact our chief back there, which makes him happy, I'm sure.
He's so happy he left.
So what is actually remaining is what we would consider non-competitive at this point. We have the Community Works position is still non-competitive, as we just discussed. Is there anything else that would be non-competitive?
The only thing would be for this biennium, the
I mean, moving
COC.
forward
No,
next year.
that would be the only one.
Okay. So other than we're still wanting to fund the Community Works position, is question 3 answered for you?
Yes,
Okay. So pretty much everything's competitive except for that one.
correct.
Okay. Mike?
Are we, because we're talking about the future, are we going to revisit the COCC position, or is now the right time to ask about that?
So that one, so in future years, do we want to say that the COC is non-competitive? It sounds like we want to evaluate, well, let's evaluate that for next year. Sort of the tail end of that, we might have to have a little discussion to say, is COC coordinator competitive or non-competitive? And then, but it sounds like the jury's out a little bit, although the money is allocated for this biennium.
I'm totally
Future
fine
bienniums,
allocating it.
We'll figure it out.
I want to understand that role better before deciding to keep it non-competitive or move it to competitive, which we can do when we're setting those numbers in the future, if that's a more appropriate time.
So COC's still under evaluation, Community Works position is not.
COCC for now, we just said to give them the money for the biennium, right?
Next biennium, in the future. Okay? I think
So
we
just to
got it.
clarify, for the COC position, I'll wait for his question. It's probably going to answer
Do
what I'm gonna
not
ask.
move 226.8 into competitive. Hold the 60, we might have 30 in ending fund balance.
Perfect.
Yes, sir.
Couple things. So it got to it at the end, but Mr. Quinn, the difference is it's not a city employee. That's why it comes to this process instead of budgeted in. I don't know if there's anything in the budget every time for a non-city employee, other than like the grants that we give to So Ready or something like that. That's contracted out in a different kind of scenario. I don't have a great reason, which makes it hard, but I don't know about allocating all of the remaining money. So that'd be so right now, as Ryan presented, there's $770,000 in requests. There's $227,000 available. If we put every last dollar in there, based on what we saw, it's $492,000, which is a lot of money for nonprofits, which understandable, especially as nonprofits are struggling right now because funding sources is dried up. So I don't have a great reason, but I do wonder about not giving all of it into the pot, right? So 492,000, I don't know. That seems like a lot. Maybe that's the right thing to do, but part of me thinks about clawing a little bit of it back and just holding it within our budget. So maybe it's 350, or maybe it's, some other number. But that's up for discussion.
So
That
question 4 is how much should we
right
put in?
should
be available?
absolutely everything, or is it a good idea to kind of withhold some money and council can use it for discretion for whatever things might arise? Just my thought.
Okay, Jessica.
We don't have to award all those funds, though, correct?
Well, you're going to get a recommendation from the HCDC on January 7th, and they're currently tonight on their second evening of reviewing the applications. So you don't have to award it, but it would be nice to be able to tell the HCDC what how much of the funding they're able to plan for, and how many of the applicants could receive the funding. So our hope was we would give them a number tonight, so when they continue their work and finish their recommendation, they have a package that they can give you that reflects something.
Do we know if the requests have exceeded the amount that we're
The
expecting?
request for
Okay.
770,000.
Okay,
So
thank
way
you.
exceeded the amount. And just to go back to the logic of not allocating it all of this money was allocated in the past to nonprofits. We just had a nonprofit that is no longer operating the sobering unit. So this was all money for nonprofits in the past, just some of it was competitive and some of it was not.
So some of the basic, oh, sorry, Mike, go ahead.
Well, if this, I'm not entirely, can we hold it back for discretionary funds? If this was budgeted as grant funds without doing something, a budget amendment or something, can we just say, never mind, we're keeping some back as
Well-
discretionary instead of going out to grants?
I don't think this has to go to budget committee. I can't imagine this is big.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I think we can. Maybe Kevin, maybe you could speak a little bit more discreetly as to what you feel the advantage of not allocating it.
So I have absolutely zero, like, oh great, I'm going to withhold some amount of money and then secretly push it out and like, oh great, now that we have this money I withheld, I want to put it. I have absolutely none of that. None at all. Like, I have no ambition. That's why it's a little hard to describe, right? Because usually I'd be like, oh, how about we spend it to there's this other thing. But when you're looking at non-competitive grants, this would obviously be, I totally understand. Yes, we hold about a certain amount of money, and we can still do that, right? And maybe we could have it, I know how this goes, right? So they'll make a recommendation. We'll have our boards and commissions come and make a recommendation. And every single time they make a recommendation, except for one who tried to give money to Ashland, that was the only time we've ever said, okay, we don't like that suggestion. We're not going to sit here as a council and say, thank you so much for spending 4 nights, 5 nights, however many nights. Now we're going to chop it up and mess around with it. But I do think there might be very possible that something happens in the next year and a half that the council is like, oh, this other nonprofit is asking for something that might fit a council goal that's not asking for right now, that we can say, oh, well, we have this $100,000 or $75,000 or whatever amount that we can then draw from in a way we wouldn't be if we put it out right now.
Okay.
That is my point.
Let me just help, or maybe think. So if you said, we want to allocate $400,000 for the non-competitive, and then transfer 92,000 and change into like the 420. I don't even know if you can put it in the 420 fund.
Just basically contingency, right? Just sort of.
Contingency? Okay. Mhm. I have no opinion one way or another on this. I'll go Keating and then Nick Card.
I do kind of like the idea of having some money left over that should we see something in the next year and a half, we could do. I'd be fine with between 92, 100,000. I think that sounds like about the right number. Pretty much on board with what Kevin Stein was saying. And if I recall, I'm slipping on the name exactly right now, but there was someone that had come to us for money, and we did not approve that, hoping that they'd reapply in the next biennium. What was that again? Do you remember that?
Oh, it wasn't New Spirit, was it?
That might have been New Spirit I'm thinking of, yeah. But so something like that is what I would like to hold back a little bit for.
Yes, Mr. Card, sorry.
So just so I understand, these grants are given out once per biennia.
Right, so the application process is started, and they're underway, and their presentations are to the HCDC. Then they make a recommendation in January, and they probably won't get funded until spring. So this whole process will start again in 2028.
Okay, so we do this once per biennia.
I have an opinion now.
Okay, well, I have mine first. Yeah, I've been recognized, unless you want to rule me out of order, Mr. Young.
For me.
I don't see a reason why we would hold back funds. I understand the instinct. I think it's a good one, but in this case, it's not like we're speculatively funding something. Like, this is us speculatively non-funding something when we know we have over $700,000 of asks from community partners that are going to do really good things with this money for our community. And so maybe I'll be proved wrong because something amazing is going to come up and it'll only cost $90,000 and wow, we're not going to have $90,000. But I think if there's something that's going to be that amazing that we're going to wish we had $90,000 for, I'm sure Ryan knows how to find $90,000 in contingency. Oh, his face is twitching now. But we could figure something out. There's enough places that if it's just $90,000 in the scale of our budget, I think we could make that work. And so I just don't see, again, I understand the instinct, but I just don't think that applies in this situation.
So my only concern about putting that in contingency and then a year and a half from now, something really cool shows up. My only issue with that is then all of a sudden, essentially it's an earmark for somebody else who doesn't have to go through the process. So that always rubs me the wrong way. And maybe, Kevin, would this somewhat be your point too, is are we going to fund really high quality projects with 492 or would 400 fund the high quality projects? Or is it really just not sure and want to hold some money back?
I mean, this is actually kind of interesting because one of the first things we did was, as a council members, was literally sit in these meetings and with some community members and figure it all out. And you know, if we give them whatever amount of money, they'll find a good organization to give it to, whether it's 492 or whether it's 300 or 226 or whatever number. I mean, they'll do their due diligence and based on whatever criteria, they'll determine how to fund it. I just when it comes to funding, there's just not very much for council discretion. And you know, we developed the 420 fund that gives us some council discretion, which is nice. I totally understand process. Believe me, I understand process. I also totally understand that 6 months from now, if whatever happens, you know, I don't think it's quite as easy to go find $90,000 or any amount of money in a budget if something occurs. We could also, I mean, we could direct staff to say, or we could direct staff to direct the commission to be like, hey, the last $90,000, like give us input in the last $92,000, and then the council can release that funding later if they wanted to, right? They can give us an input where they're part of the system, but they wouldn't be granted it, you know, unless we don't find it something else to give it to. So I understand it's a little more hairy than just saying, hey, go give us an input and we'll approve it in a little bit. But, you know, based on a little bit of history, it is just nice to have the availability when things do pop up.
Curlinger?
I really like the idea of contingency funds because that's just how I am. But I also do think there's a lot of potential for weirdness to hold some money back while we know there's competitive grant requests for organizations that are going to go unfunded. And then, like you said, 12 months from now, someone comes along and we're like, oh, we really like that idea. And they come to us and don't have to go through the same competitive process that every other recipient of these funds had to go through. That feels a little nepotistic to me.
Okay, Garrett.
I agree with Mr. Curlinger.
All right.
Potentially nepotistic.
Well, I'll just point out the council did this before with the Salvation Army. What was the housing project that we just completely just gave it to them without them having to go through the competitive process? Was that Salvation Army? Yes. So this council, you guys, not me, I voted against it, but you guys already did that, right? Like, so it is not something beyond the board of this council to do that, to take something completely out of cycle and give money to someone who didn't have to go through a process.
All right, so here we go. We're either doing 400 or 492.
We can't vote, so.
I know, so we need to give some direction here. Yes,
While
sir.
you can't vote, you can give a straw poll as part of giving direction to staff. It's not a final action of council.
Is everyone okay? Let's just split the baby here, which means it's a horrible decision, and do the 400 with the 92 contingency for like free approval on 400, and you'd like to see what the extra 92 gets used for prior to full release. I think that's the best we can do.
Okay. We'll take it. Thank you.
It did. It is. Okay.
If everyone's unhappy, it was successful government action.
Yeah. Okay, so we're done with study session, right? I only have 3 on here. We have executive session meeting, start at, 8:10-ish.